Hello everyone, it is finally October here on the East Coast, which is the perfect time to head outside to find walnuts for natural dyeing. I like to take my son to a park by our house so we can collect the freshest walnuts for my natural dye pots. I started natural dyeing about 16 years ago with walnut husks, and I think it's a great jumping off point for anybody who's interested in starting to natural dye. Walnuts are easy to identify on the ground. They are green in their husks and have a slight citrus smell. I like to collect and process them when they are very green. As you can see under the green flesh, there is a lot of tannin-rich dye, but be careful, it will dye everything it comes in contact with, so wear old clothes and gloves if you are concerned. There will also most likely be worms or fly larvae when you crack open the walnut husks, so if you are squeamish, just prepare yourselves. Walnut trees are very tall with a distinctive leaf shape that is easy to identify. I like to keep an eye out as I walk in the woods during the summer months, so I know exactly where to look come autumn. Collecting walnuts with little ones is just another great reason to get outside, and I know that my 3-year-old loves a job, and collecting walnuts in his basket is really fun for me and my son. I like to make walnut dye as soon as possible, before my walnut husks that I've just collected have a chance to dry. I'm going to smash the husks with a rock or a hammer. You can usually feel a slight pop, and the husk should easily separate from the hard center. I like to collect the husks in one pot and the walnut pits in another. I have found that using the green husks alone for my dye bath gives the best results, so I will throw the pits back into the woods for the animals to eat. And don't forget your gloves, of course. When I am dyeing anything, I always keep really detailed notes. This will help me later when I want to repeat my process or tweak it if something doesn't turn out as I'd wished. If I am collecting dye stuff in nature, in this case walnuts, I like to start off by noting when and where I collected my walnuts, what the weather has been like, in this case warmer than normal, and how much I have collected for my dye bath. Today I have collected 2 pounds of fresh walnut husks. I'm also going to write down anything that comes to mind that I think might be important later when I need to remember what I did to create the colors that I've created from natural dye. Next, I'm going to put my separated walnut husks into a large aluminum pot that I only use for dyeing and cover them with boiling water. I will put them on my dye stove and slowly raise the temperature until it is softly boiling and simmer my husks in water for at least an hour, but often for a few hours. A quick note on safety: when I am dyeing, I always make sure to wear the proper safety gear, which covers my hands, face, and eyes with my hair tied back. I highly recommend you always do the same. While my pot of husks is cooking, I will now prepare the things I want to dye. I am going to dye a small hank of wool, which I have wound on the back of a chair and loosely tied in 4 places to keep it from tangling during the dye process. I'll weigh this hank and record its weight in my notebook. Next, I'm going to weigh a fat quarter cut of 100% linen and a fat quarter of a cotton linen blend, which I will also weigh and make a note of in my dye journal. Next, I'm going to soak the things I plan on dyeing for at least 2 hours in warm water. You want to make sure the dye is soaked up into your fabric or wool evenly when you add it to your dye bath, so pre-soaking thoroughly is a crucial step. Once my dye pot is finished cooking and has had enough time to cool, I'm going to strain the husks from the dye bath. I am using a normal pasta strainer that I have marked with a tie, which means that it is only used to dye fabric and not for cooking in my kitchen. I am also placing a wet, finely woven cloth over my strainer to catch smaller particles. I'm going to make 2 dye pots because I want to dye my cotton and linen fabrics separately from my wool hang. Wool tends to quickly draw dye away from cotton or linen if they are placed in the same dye pot, so it's a good idea to use separate baths. You will also need to be more gentle with wool when it is heating up to avoid felting, while the cotton and linen will need to be agitated and moved around in the dye bath to create an even application of the color. I will wring the water from my soaking linen fabric before adding it to my first dye bath. It is important to avoid air pockets, so once your fabric is submerged beneath the dye, agitate the fabric to push out any trapped air. Make sure there is enough dye in your dye pot so that your fabric can move around easily and isn't crumpled up for an even final dye product. This is some cotton embroidery floss I have left over and decided to try and dye. It is 100% cotton, so I'm going to add it to my linen and cotton fabric dye pot. Next, I will strain some of my dye bath into my second pot for wool. Again, I'm going to gently wring the water from my pre-soaked hank of wool before placing it in the dye bath. You can see right away how well the wool soaks up the dye, and I'm really excited to see how these turn out. Make sure this hank is completely submerged. These husks look to me like they still have some dye left in them, so I will add them to a smaller pot with water to boil them again and try to extract any leftover dye. Very slowly, I am going to heat my dye pots over the course of about an hour. I want to bring them to just below a boil and then simmer them there for about another hour or so. This means I'll have to keep an eye on my pots, agitating my fabric to prevent air pockets from forming and uneven dyeing. I am also going to very gently agitate my wool hank, but with a metal utensil, as a wooden spoon would get caught on the wool. Once my pots have simmered for at least an hour, I usually leave them overnight or at least until they have cooled completely. I will remove everything from their dye pots and gently wash each individual item separately. For the fabric, I rinse each fat quarter with cool water, gradually raising the temperature until the water runs clear at a very high temperature. For the wool, I will rinse it at a cool to cold temperature until the water rinses clear. Be careful not to agitate your wool too much during the rinsing process or raise the rinsing water temperature to avoid felting. And let's see what our results are. The linen and linen cotton dyed up in a lovely gray brown that was pretty similar, which actually surprised me a little bit. The 100% cotton floss turned out just about the same as the pure linen and linen cotton blend fabric, but the real standout color was the wool hank that just drank up the dye. It's definitely my favorite, and I think I'll be heading right back to the walnut park to collect more walnuts to dye some more wool and more embroidery floss and more fabric. This was really fun for me. I hope this was also really fun for you. If you give any of these techniques a try, let me know how it went in the comments below. If you like textile crafts and want to see more, please consider subscribing here on YouTube or follow along with Stuart Textiles on Instagram or TikTok.